Aloha. This video, I wanted to keep the dream theme rolling from the last video and pick up on some things that I didn't really miss. I just didn't mention because the video was just already long enough. But some things that I really think that are important to realize when we're looking at the depths of illusions and being lied to about your universe, being lied to about who and what you are, what your relationships are with nature and each other and the soul. Like being told you are not a soul or you don't have a soul is like the equivalent of telling like a kid that Santa Claus doesn't exist times a million at the peak of their like Santa loving sort of thing. It's like while they're opening up presents and they're at that age. It's a bad example of it, but what that does, and just imagine if that moment carries on for the rest of their lives, like they can never let go of that. So if like they were never able to grow out of that moment, that's the kind of effect that being told that you have no meaning and no purpose has on the adults. And the individuals just kind of grow throughout their lives, adjusting to that reality that is just broken. And this is what the scientism community does when they lock people into these theories and call them facts, when they lock people into these empty ideas of who and what you are in order to hollow out not only your body but your mind and your soul so that something else can fill it. This is at the heart of the heliocentric deception and authority and control overall. As long as they empty you out, then they can make a profit of what they sell you to fill your reality with. Let me say that again. As long as they empty you out, they can make a profit as long as they have put themselves in the seat of authority. As long as they've placed themselves on that throne of illusion, they can fill your reality with whatever they choose. And that filler can adjust. It does adjust to the consciousness of the individual and the collective. So this is why you see so much information being thrown at us at this time now, because the consciousness of the individual and the collective has grown since in this last however many years, not just because of the internet, not just because of technology. It could be something more natural, because we all know that before anything manifests into the body, or not everybody knows this, but before something manifests in the mind, it has to manifest in the soul. Before something manifests in the body, it has to first manifest in the mind. So it's a shock wave, a vibratory shock wave. If you are separated from your soul, then you will have problems, bigger problems, like multiplied with your higher mind. If you have problems with the relationship with your higher mind, those will eventually materialize into the physical reality, and so on and so forth. Like as long as this dense reality, like the solid, like the gas, the liquid, and the physical, the solid, it's the same thing. Hot gas moves really quick. Those bubbles, that stuff is moving all the way around real quickly. That's still you though. It's still part of you, but you're more expansive now. Your heat is pretty much, you can fill an entire room with a gas. With a liquid, it has a different focus, a different intent. But that liquid, like Bruce Lee can say, you can flow or you can crash. So it still has a power. It still has a meaning. It fills the body. So that liquid of the higher mind fills the body. It keeps the body alive. So the body is like the solid, or the solid state, the ice cube form. So that's how we see it now. I'm just, flowing with just metaphors and stuff like this. So we see how all of these fit together. And as long as you can manipulate the various vibrations of life without people knowing it, and then have them do it to themselves and in their generations, then you have enslaved an individual or an entire race of people, or a group of people, or mass of people. This is what's happening with us being separated from our dreams, and us being separated from the natural interpretations of this universe. So when we get locked into the physicality of the heliocentric universe, and you see that, all the planets out there, they're dead, you still have a connection to them, and people who are like astrologically speaking, they follow their sun in whatever house, their moon in the house, and all these planets in certain houses. Like, we think that's just toys. Like, people in the New Age community, they think those are just like toys. Like, no, this stuff is a code. It's a code that is a relationship. It's a code of the relationship that you have with the experience itself. When your soul entered into this experience, into this body, it had an astrological code that relates to the so-called planets, which are just these wandering stars, these light bodies, these energetic. This is why we have so much connection to the sun and the moon and the stars and the light bodies that we call planets, is because there's something there. I'm not saying that, all astrology is right and all this other stuff. I'm just saying that there's something there. I don't know what it is. I haven't gone into the depths of astrology and 12 signs or 13 signs of astrology. I haven't gone into the depths of that. I know that when I've read about the alignments and all this other stuff, it makes a lot of sense to me. It does make a lot of sense to me. So I kind of leave it at that, and leave that up to the professionals who are like driven to do that kind of interpretation. But I don't throw it all away. I just leave it there and say, okay, well, when it's supposed to make sense or fit into my reality, it will. So that's just another example of what separating yourself from your interpretation of this reality does, how it affects you and your time. It affects you and your time through your consciousness. So as long as your consciousness is operating in first gear, if you keep people in first gear, and the only way they can get to second gear is through an illusory second gear by getting a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a PhD, as long as you control their idea of expansion, their idea of conscious evolution, their idea of who and what they are in this entire experience, that's how you can control time. Time is how, when you control time, you're controlling the consciousness, and vice versa. When you can control consciousness, you can control time. So this is why people are locked into giving their time away, the 9 to 5, to the system. This is why television, social media, mainstream media is locked in to sucking your time into the lower vibrations of fear, destruction, lack, apathy, codependency, complacency, just empty, dead versions of your reality. That is the norm. So you can see this in relation to the dream video that I just did, the last video, as not being able to work in a dream because you're powerless. You're locked into your emotional body. This is the emotional body isn't who you are. It's not what you are. It's a part of your experience. But it's such a big part of your experience that if you limit yourself to that part of your experience, you can literally convince yourself that you are your emotions. This is why you have like really, really, really oversensitive people, like extremely, like they can get triggered off of anything. Men and women, it just anything will trigger them to break down in tears. Like that's an extreme version of, being locked into your emotional body. They have manifested their emotional body into all of their bodies, and that becomes their so-called persona. That's their new belief system. And it's not as simple as that. It's very complex. People use that as a defense mechanism. They use that as a way to get things. They use that like to manipulate people. They use that as a way to work the system pretty much overall. And there's various ways that they do that. This is the same kind of mechanism that happens when you're in a nightmare and you wake yourself up. Jumping into your emotional body is the same kind of mechanism as waking yourself up in a nightmare. The thing that happens is escapism. You're escaping the reality. So whether you escape from jumping from the dream world to the waking state, or you jump from acknowledging the reality, or taking responsibility for your moment, or jumping into the emotional body and running away, crying, whatever it is, you're using the experience as a prescription drug. You're using it as a medicine, and we all know that you could overdose on medicine. And when you overdose on medicine, or you become a junkie, the medicine literally changes your reality to where you now no longer have any control over yourself. So if you have no control over yourself, meaning you're subjected to whatever the reality presents to you, then you sure as hell are not going to have any control over the higher vibrations of stuff like your dreams or anything that gets presented to you in your reality. This is why it's so difficult for drug addicts to be at all climatized to an everyday reality. Like they're so like something is there, and then some of them default to the emotional body. I need it, or they, whatever it is. It's about manipulating the structure of every body that you are, your soul body, your mind body, and your physical body. So as long as you're locked in, so we can see this as, food is a drug. So you have food addicts. People are overweight, like have like severely overweight because they can't stop eating. How is that any different than a drug addict? There is no difference. The only difference is in mainstream society is that it takes a lot longer for somebody to die from food than it does for drugs. And there's a double thing that goes on with drugs and food. With food, they can obviously make a profit off of it. They can function. It's a part of, it's like what alcohol does. It's like a depressant. Like it has the facade of bringing you up, but it's actually bringing you down. It's adding more density, because we all know that you don't need as much food as you're actually eating. That's one of the first things that I realized in my life when I started changing things, is that you don't need as much as you're told to have. This is why you're constantly bombarded by fast food commercials in movies and all this other thing, and it just makes it this whole out of balanced version of reality. It makes it normal, and density is normal. Like over densifying your experience makes you normal. So when they weigh you down physically and psychologically and spiritually, you are literally slowing time down, because you're affecting the way they live their lives, the way their ability or potential to revolt, their ability to think, their ability to feel, the relationships. Everything is shockwave when people densify their realities. So when an individual fills their lives up with gap fillers, then, like I said in the last video, eventually you're going to have an hollowed out individual. You're going to have a zombie. So this is why they put all these zombie movies on here, to tell you this is what a zombie looks like. No, a zombie doesn't look like that. A zombie looks like the everyday individual. McDonald's manifested into a human being. That's what a zombie is. Like, they tell you all this extreme stuff. It's kind of like the dystopian mechanism of movies. They're like, oh, I'm so glad we're not, faced with an asteroid coming to destroy the earth. I'm so glad it's not like Judge Dredd the movie, or what happens in any of these other dystopian movies that are out there that, like Mad Max is a good one. The new Mad Max. That's the perfect breakdown of a dystopian mind control program, is to say, well, at least the world is not like Mad Max. We could basically be Neanderthals that are just fighting for water and, living underneath in a caged dome. By the way, if you haven't seen that, the Thunder Dome, that's in the first one. I think it might be in this. No, it's not in this. It's not in the new one. In the original Mad Max, they had the Thunderdome with Tina Turner and stuff. But anyway, these are all these mechanisms that control. Ultimately, they control your subconscious, and they control control your conscious reality through your subconscious programming. This is why you have to be seeded with all of these, like the Simpsons. What is that? What is that term for like implanting an event in your experience before it happens? Well, you know what I'm talking about when I'm saying that. The Simpsons puts it in 9/11, in cartoons before 9/11 happens. So the same thing happens with the dystopian futures, and even these utopian futures. It has the same effect on you. You are externalizing your reality based upon what society has told you society is supposed to be like, and what it's not supposed to be like. So when they give you the extreme of the positive, like technology, Star Trek, Star Wars, all these universal pictures that flash in your reality, in your subconscious, reality. This is what life is supposed to be like, what it's going to be like. You're literally affecting their dreams. Same thing happens for nightmares, which is why kids are so affected by Friday the 13th, Freddy Krueger, Halloween, and all this other stuff, is because they're vulnerable, so they get affected by that. And then on the other hand, they have these Star Wars and Star Trek dreams, and He-Man, Masters of the Universe dreams. So this is how you're actually being programmed. Once they lock you into subconsciously defending yourself against other people who are challenging your illusions, they got you, and you cannot get out of that until you break the illusions. This is why people are starting to dream again. And this is why I said in the original dream video where I was talking about cannabis, how I stopped smoking cannabis because it was affecting my dreams. This was back in 2014. My brother and I stopped smoking because I was telling him my dreams every day. I would sometimes wake him up and wake other people up. Hey, I just had this crazy ass dream. And I would talk about these dreams. And over time, he started to realize the importance of these dreams. And I started to realize even deeper the importance of these dreams by cross-referencing them and, sharing and having other people share these dreams. But we both realized, because we were heavy into smoking weed at that time, that cannabis really does affect your ability to remember your dreams. That's the thing. It kind of, how I see it energetically is what's happening is cannabis opens you up to it's kind of like it opens you up to yourself for that moment, and you feel your moment with yourself. So the beauty, that's why everybody's so happy and joy and all this other stuff, and then they're real kind of like friendly and all this. This is why the establishment had made it illegal for so long, and alcohol and cigarettes were legal, because alcohol does pretty much the opposite. It opens you up to the down version of like yourself, like you're depressive. Like, this is why you get high when you smoke weed, and you just kind of mellow out and chill out when you're. But what's the extreme version of going down? Abusive as alcoholics and so on and so forth. That's beneficial for the system, because they can imprison these alcoholics. They can get money from them going to jail. They can get money from, them being an alcoholic, and then the recovery of being an alcoholic. So this is what all this Russell Brand shit is with, selling this whole, like, everything is about addiction. And yeah, it's all true. Yeah, it's good shit that you're talking about. But at the same time, see how this is working. See how this system is playing people. Those are some people that are being used in that system. And if you're focused so much on the system itself, and you're not focusing on you as a system and us as a system, largely non-physically, then you're limiting yourself to the mind control program that they want to lock you in. So that's just another side note. But back to the cannabis. So you can see the differences between like alcohol and cannabis, and then why now they are pushing to legalize it, because the consciousness of the people is adjusting to the frequency of what cannabis takes you to. So people don't need to smoke weed to get high. You don't need to get there. Individuals can get to that space. Yes, it might take you, here and there, but it's still all temporary. So that means that you yourself are the experience. So as long as you get to tap into what that experience is, you don't need things to take you there. So you can just imagine spreading a high out, like the intellectual high or the feeling of highness, within a relationship, like love and connection and stuff like that, and joy and passion, and imagine spreading that out throughout your entire day, every day, but not as extreme. That's what happens when you lighten up your reality. You actually start to fly. You start to float, and you start to become high. So the treat of cannabis just allows you to stick your head in that doorway and see it. But the thing is, there's always downfalls to a medicine. There's always side effects. There might be more than others with other kinds of medications, like the synthetic shit is horrible. But something like cannabis, it's still a medicine. It's going to have mechanisms built within it to tell people, hey, yes, this might be helping you in one way, but if you overuse this, you will lose a certain part of something. So this is when I started to realize, this is not to come down on cannabis or anything or say it's bad. It's just to say that with anything, with the overuse of anything, or with the use of anything, really, the overuse is just a good example of how that works. With the overuse of anything, there's going to be side effects that will eventually start to weigh you down and add more density and counteract what it is that you think you're doing. So when we were smoking cannabis, I realized right off the bat I was not able to remember my dreams, and not even able to remember my dreams, but it was kind of like a black cloud to where I would go when I would try to remember my dreams. It's like they were turned off or something. I just didn't know what it was. I knew I was dreaming. I had the sensation, I had the feeling, I had the knowingness that I was still dreaming, but I had no access. The door wasn't there anymore. That's probably the best way to explain it, because there was something in the way. And I realized that this something was smoking cannabis. And that's not to say that it completely shut it off, because some people, and I remember this part of my life too, where dreams would be more intense, but it was only for a short amount of time. For other people, it's they dream more intensely with when they smoke cannabis. But for a large majority of people, from my observations, cannabis actually affects the dreams negatively, in a sense that you're not really bringing that information back. You're always dreaming, so it's not a matter of, you stopping your dreams. But how I equated that math was, energetically speaking, you're accessing part of the dream world when you get high. So if you access so much of the dream world when you get high, then you need to rest. So you don't access that part of the dream world when you're sleeping. So when you smoke cannabis and you don't do anything when you go to that space, like when you don't access that medicine for the medicinal properties that it is, like mind medicine or soul medicine. If you just use it for physical medicine, you're actually just, you're using it like a drug, pretty much. That's actually what it is. If you don't use it for the soul and the mind, you only use it for the physical. And there's nothing wrong with it for people in like pain. I understand that. Use it for pain. I understand that. But what I'm saying is that for people who are, recreationally using it and all that other stuff, think about these things. And think about this as a doorway, cannabis as a natural doorway. It has a meaning and a purpose, no different than shrooms and ayahuasca. Like, these are doorways. And if you just keep using the doorway like a kid just playing with the door, eventually you're gonna break that door. You're gonna mess with the access to, possibly other doors, and it's going to turn into something that is not necessarily beneficial ultimately in the long run. In the short run, shit, you can smoke weed all day, every day, and I don't think it's really going to mess with you. Excuse me, you might gain a little weight here and there from eating too much, but at the same time, it does affect your appetite to where you don't eat as much. But when you do eat, you eat like crazy. But I've noticed, like, when I did smoke, my appetite was like, I didn't have to eat as much. And I think that's really because I was getting into a space of less density. So you don't need to fill your body up anymore, because you're full. You're full with your higher mind. You're full with your soul. You're full with not being limited to the physical reality. So you don't need stuff to fill your body. When you're drinking alcohol and all that in that space to the extreme, it's like liquid emptiness. And that liquid emptiness is good up to a point to where you kind of like, you mellow out, you lighten up because you're empty up to that point. But when you take it even further, that's when that emptiness kind of overtakes you. Because we're so full with life. This is what alcohol does in everyday life. People go to work, they're full of shit pretty much when you have to fill your life up with a 9 to 5 and you got to work under this asshole manager and you got to work for these piece of shit ass coworkers who just are empty and don't give a shit about anything other than themselves or the way they look, or they're just pretty much like a human version of McDonald's or a human version of a mall. Whatever that is, it's like the most generic ass version of reality that you could ever imagine. But that's normal. That's normal. That's what is accepted. That's why I said this is zombie land. So alcohol allows you, the reason why people, get off work or on the weekends, have a beer, have a glass of wine or a couple beers or a couple glasses of wine, is because they have that they're full of shit, and wine kind of brings you down to where you're like sitting underneath that shit. It doesn't affect, it's not weighing you down anymore. And then, but the catch 22 to that is, you're not running from it. It's still there. It's still weighed on top of you. And if you don't have any ability to like what meditation does, it allows you to step outside of yourself. If you can't do that, then what happens when you drink too much or you get into that weight actually amplifies, it multiplies. And this is where, people take it to the extreme and they become abusive when they drink to themselves or to other people, because they are now not only weighed down by the density of their 9 to 5, but they amplify that by the drug that is alcohol. And you can see how that weight multiplies times 1,000 or 1,000,000, and people don't know what to do with that. So they externalize it, they project it onto somebody else, or they internalize it and become depressed, and that's how they run away. So this is another version of like tuning into the emotional body. And then all of these other things that come up from their past, like abusive history, like the majority of people who are abusive is because they themselves have been abused. So the majority of people don't really do anything with that. They never look at it. They are constantly medicating themselves with prescription drugs or alcohol or even cannabis. Cannabis is another way to do that. So you see all these people, like I said now, in reference to the new age mentality of, and even some parts of the flat earth, hoping that it goes mainstream and that's going to just fix the world, or the new age just thinking that it's going to fix the world when aliens come down or we start talking to our, extraterrestrial brethren. It's a prescription drug. It's a medicine. It's not a diet. It's not a way of life. Taking pills every day is not a way of life. But, you can see how cannabis does the same thing. Cannabis, to a certain extent, like it takes you to a space, and that's going to save your world just as long as cannabis is legal. Then, okay, well, multiply that, like fast forward, time jump into like 5 and 10 years from now when you're smoking every day. You're smoking on your breaks. You're smoking here. You're smoking there at night when you wake up in the morning. You're smoking with your friends. Like, multiply that. Is it fun? Yeah, it's going to be cool. Are you going to be missing out on something? Yes. There's something there, whether it's like a little percentage or a huge percentage for people who really know what I'm talking about. Something's going to be missing. And what I'm saying that something is the potential that you have to go beyond the vibrations of whatever it is that you're putting in your body. So something like alcohol that weighs you down. Cannabis weighs you down in a sense that it's something other than you, the thing or the essence, the experience that you are. So like a good example, like a solid example for this was in my earlier videos when I was smoking. I would do videos where I was high, and then I would just like, because I would get on these, I would get this inspiration from a perspective, and then I would just, turn it into a video. Over time, I started to realize that I wasn't able to get to where I was getting to, like I wanted to get. I couldn't verbalize it. I couldn't turn those pictures into words, into a language, because the cannabis was actually slowing me down. When I realized that, because I would do videos when I was high, and then I would do videos when I wasn't. And I realized over time that the videos where I wasn't smoking, the inspiration wasn't as extreme, it wasn't as potent, but the flow over time was more potent because I was more concise, I was more straight to the point, and I could go further. So what I realized is all I need to do is allow time to present the potency of that inspiration, and then I'll just go into the movie or the video. Then I would start the video then. So I would allow all this imagination, the potency, and the inspiration to just accumulate, and then I would have all of that information there. Sometimes I would write it down, and I would use like little cues here and there to help me remember, and then I would just flow with it. So now having like 3 or 4, it's probably like, because I started actually in 2012, but I don't have those videos anymore. But after like 5 years of working with that, it's all like one system now, and I don't really need anything else to do it. And in fact, if I use anything else, if I were to smoke cannabis, it might be a hell of a lot funnier. I might even get in some crazy ass inspirational moments, but ultimately over time, this is my point, it affects it negatively. It affects me negatively. The process that I go through, because it's holding me back in some kind of way. And it's hard to see that for a lot of people, because getting high is so beautiful. It's just like, oh man, this feels really good. But when you maximize the timeline, then you can start to see what's going on here. Same with alcohol, like getting drunk. Let's just go and have some beers or whatever. And it was so awesome. We had an amazing time. And over time, what's happening to your body? Like, you're gaining weight. You're like, you're not really facing problems. You're just drinking your life away, and then, it adds up. So this is what I'm seeing on a higher. See, that could be seen on like the lower. If you, as your experience is the equilibrium, like the neutral part of a timeline, then you can see alcohol affecting you negatively, just very generally speaking. And then cannabis being on the other side of that neutrality, it affects you positively. But your negative and your positive have no limitations. They just keep going. So alcohol can thrust you into the abyss of negativity land, or the nothingness. Cannabis can thrust you into the positive space, but it will max out, because you can only always go as far as you will allow yourself to go. You can't just, it's not the superhero of everything, because you can't put a superhero costume on a regular person and expect superhero shit to happen. It doesn't work like that. So cannabis is being sold like that because they can make a profit off of it. And the thing is, why it's so wonderful is because at least it's not alcohol. That's the same thing. It's like the Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton shit. It's like, at least it's not Donald Trump. We should vote for Hillary. That's what Hollywood and politics was selling you. And then ultimately their main mission was to get that piece of shit Donald Trump in there. And the only thing that movie was being played was to make you think that it was still real, like your vote still mattered and all that stuff. So anyway, cannabis, what I'm saying is that the downfalls from cannabis, over time, they exist over time. And what happens is it stops you over time. Like it opens the door and it can project you into that space where you ultimately are. But like I said, it's like putting a costume, a superhero costume, on a regular person. Like, you can either become the regular person or the superhero through your regular person reality, and you won't need a superhero costume. That's what I'm saying cannabis is over time. You don't need a superhero costume if you are the superhero. So what cannabis is doing is that it's giving everybody superhero costumes. Same thing happens with alcohol, but it's just a ridiculous version of a superhero costume. People just crash their faces into the ground or get overly drunk and can't do, and you know what I'm saying. So anyway, it's being sold as a drug when it's not a drug. It's a medicine at best. And when you know what medicines are, then you know that you're not really supposed to be doing it for, you're just avoiding, you're running away. You're kind of doing the same thing that alcohol does, which is looking the other way from the point. What is the point? Like, what are you doing here? What's wrong with that in a sense that this is obviously outside of the whole recreational thing, but it includes it because people consider themselves recreational, but some person's recreational is like 1 beer, 2 beers, and then other people's is like 10 beers all night, only on the weekends. That's cool. That's it. Well, when you see that there is no real kind of like, when you see it from a freedom perspective or whatever, I don't like using that word, but just in reference to like being enslaved to the 9 to 5. Monday through Friday is basically one day. Monday through Friday is the weekday. Your weekend is when you are supposedly free. So the weekend, your Saturday and Sunday, or your Friday night and Saturday night, that's where you're supposedly free. And then you can do whatever it is that you want, and so on and so forth. But the weekdays are one vibration. The weekends are one vibration. If you fill your weekdays with depression and work because you have responsibility, then that's one vibration. If you fill your weekends with, alcohol and drugs, then that's one vibration. In the moment, you might be saying, oh yeah, well, I'm just, getting high or drinking 10 beers every day off. That's cool. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's something that we're missing. That's my main point. We're missing something. Just like when I was explaining, when I was doing my videos, I started to realize that it was affecting me. The same way I started to realize that dreams are very important and they start to affect me. So in reference to going back to the relationship between cannabis and dreams, because I don't want to get too much into the politics of, this, because you're going to offend people who think, I'm coming down on weed or, all this. No, I'm just speaking in reference to the extremes. And I speak in reference to the extremes because the so-called powers that be are very aware of these extremes, and that's where they're playing because it exists outside of time. It doesn't care about time because time is relative to the experiencer. It cares about manipulating your consciousness. So as long as your consciousness, the pure signal of your uninhibited soul experience, as long as that perspective is being bogged down by some kind of medication or being bogged down by some kind of psychological medication or psychological density or spiritual density, then they got you, because that is manipulating the code of your consciousness. So I'm not really talking about the specifics when I'm talking about alcohol. Every now and again, I'll have a beer or a glass of wine. So I'm not talking about the specifics of the moment of that. I'm talking about over time, how it affects us, and collectively how it affects us. Because once you get into seeing that experience from that perspective, that's when you can start to disassemble the intentions of a lot of these programs that exist out there, and we invite in there, inside of us. So that's where I'm coming from with it. So like, I don't have a problem with cannabis or anything like that. The only thing I'm sharing right now is how it's affected me, and how it's affected my work. Because if it's doing that on one scale and it's happening to 1 or 10 other people, I've confirmed that for myself. A lot of people have confirmed that dreams are affected, or the dream whatever is affected by cannabis. Then when you see that it's being commercialized, it's being genetically modified, it's being messed with, and at the same time it's being projected into society as the way they want it to be. So they don't give a shit largely now about growing hemp fields to get rid of the plastic problem or the paper problem when they're cutting down trees. They just want to grow cannabis so you can drug yourself up and just be just stoned forever and not give a shit. It's just like a drug-induced nihilism. Like, you're so high, you don't care, man. I don't care. That's where they want to keep people. So when they term it like recreational, first of all, who the fuck are you to tell me what my recreation should be about? Like, you don't approve that. Secondly, this is a plant. What are you talking about? Stop putting yourself in charge of nature. You're not in charge of nature. You're not. So that's another reason why this stuff is being commercialized, because it's always going to boil down to power. And as long as you're just accepting what the power that they have because they've given you this doggy treat, then they got you again. And stuff like heliocentrism and the laws of gravity, the laws of the universe, the Big Bang, all this intellect, that's a doggy treat. It's an intellectual doggy treat. And once flat earth catches on in the mainstream, it will be commercialized and turned into another doggy treat. And then they'll just own it and sell it back to the people from another half-wit interpretation of this reality that ultimately will boil down to being controlled. And you will not be able to challenge this system or go to the depths of understanding what is actually happening if you are filling your life with density, with food, drugs, whatever it is, to a point to where you have absolutely no control over. You're not using it for what its maximum potential is. Like I said, in reference to the soul, the mind, and the body, and ingesting cannabis, obviously there's nothing wrong for using like cannabis or CBD for healing yourself. There's nothing, obviously, that's what I see its intention is. There's also nothing wrong with getting high every now and again. There's a different type. This is the point, though. There's a different type of high. There's an escapism high, and then there's a high where you tune in. And yes, that might be a little part of a mixture. It's not like cut and dry. There might be a mixture between these. But there's the high that people get high, and then they start going into spiritually interpreting their reality, or intellectually through their higher mind interpreting their reality. And that's another version of healing. So that's where THC actually is also a medicine. And then you have the body of actually physically being able to relax when you have the differences of effect with indica and sativa and so on and so forth. So like, this is how I'm seeing is what's going. See, they're selling it to you as an alcohol. They want you to escape. When they say it's recreational, when they say it's that, they know people are going to escape and use it as a drug, because it will always boil down to the experiencer. The experiencer, the consciousness of the individual, is what matters, not the drug, not all of this shit. It's kind of like flat earth. Flat earth doesn't matter to a lot of people if those people are still slaves. If 1% of their reality is a flat earth confirmation or a not heliocentric universe confirmation, that doesn't matter to the 99% of the rest of their existence that is based upon enslavement. Like, they can't live without being enslaved by this slave system. So that's why I'm saying that's just an extreme version of what's going on, or what will happen when flat earth goes mainstream. Flat earth isn't going to matter when you have a race of people or an entire collective of people who are completely mind controlled into being enslaved. Flat or round or globe or triangle or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If you're a slave, you're going to be a slave. It's not going to matter. So this is why I said it's so important to go into the structure of reality itself, the meaning and purpose of the experiencer and the relationship that the experiencer has with the experience itself. This is where you start going into the how and the why, and you start disassembling the density of the slave program itself. How was flat earth installed into this consciousness, or heliocentrism installed into this consciousness? How is flat earth, the mainstream version of flat earth, being installed into this consciousness? Why was heliocentrism installed into this consciousness? Why is that effect so effective, in a sense? Why? Like, that's when you start asking questions of yourself. It's like, how did this affect me? Why did I allow this to affect me? Oh, well, because this, and this, and this. When it's sold just scientifically, which is why I said you have to be very cognizant and use a deeper layer of discernment when you're seeing the so-called flat earth community and, you know, this and that. This is not to say like people are bad people and all this. This is just to say that use some discernment here. Look at what's being promoted. Like I said, those individuals are going to be limited to themselves. They will never be able to put on a superhero costume and become a superhero. You yourself have to be that. You can dress yourself up in whatever kind of princess costume. You can wear whatever kind of muscle costume you want. If you're still just a little nothing on the inside, that's what will be reflective of in your reality, in every interaction and in every shockwave that you send through this experience. And the system knows this, which is why it's playing the long run. They exist outside of time. It exists outside of time. When I was talking to my friend the other day, we were talking about like evil, like what is evil, and how I was explaining like evil is not going to present itself as evil. It's not going to come dressed up in a Satan costume. It's not going to come dressed up in a devil costume and say, hey, I'm the ultimate evil. This is what evil looks like. Boom, fire and boom. No, the ultimate evil is going to present itself as the most loving, caring, unifying, sustainable, progressive being in the universe, because it needs you to believe in the 99th percentile of its mind control. Like I said, in reference to channeling and those channelers, they can tell you 99% of love and light information. But if they are avoiding information, if they are avoiding perspectives in that last 1%, and that last 1%, that avoidance can be multiplied or be seen from a perspective of allowing evil to exist, being neutral in situations where that evil can thrive, then that is actually the intention. And the 99% of the love only exists because they're trying to hide the evil. That's what I'm saying, is this whole evil will not present itself as evil. It will present itself as the opposite of that. And it only needs a little bit of that evil to exist inside its core for you to just accept it. This is what I'm saying. It's a downfall with the New Age community, New Age perspectives, the New World Order, getting ready to shift gears from destruction to creation with this whole sustainable development program, the unifying through the United Nations, the all this stuff. They're prepping you to believe in the new superhero that is really evil dressed in a superhero hero costume. And as long as people are dumbed down or even dumbed up with cannabis and not really facing the not only cannabis, but all these other things that are out there that dumb you up. Technology is another version of like what cannabis potentially could be doing to you when it takes you to that. Like, oh, like believing in SpaceX. Like when people are like clapping and celebrating a rocket going into the space and then landing itself, that's a high for them. They're getting high. They're just smoking SpaceX, a strand of SpaceX cannabis. It's like, oh yeah, this is amazing. Can't wait till we go to Mars. And if you play the movie, they can get high from a movie, just like you can cry in a movie. You can get high from a movie. SpaceX is a movie. People get high from watching Kim Kardashian. They get high from watching social media. Every social media thing you're watching, that's a high. So this is what I'm saying. Like these distractions and these things that affect us are they're really important to see how they work, why they're being utilized, and what that's separating us from. So you can see the heliocentric universe as being another drug. It's the same thing. It's an intellectual drug, an intellectual high. When Neil deGrasse Tyson gets on television and starts talking about the universe, this star stuff, he sexualizes it another way. This is another thing. People know a lot about this, and they joke about it. Even Stephen Colbert even verbalized it when he was talking about, I don't know why, you just make it real sexy when you talk about the universe. That's like a lady in a bikini on a Carl's Jr. commercial selling you a fucking burger. It's the same thing. When he gets on the microphone and he tells you about how, stars come together. They come together and they merge in this relationship, this thing that is just natural with the laws of gravity and coming from the Big Bang. And this, it's a radio. It's like, what is that? ASMR? Is that what ASMR is when they get real? That's what he's doing. The same thing when he got on that late night talk show and he took off his jacket. It's like, ooh, oh yeah, woo, let's get smart and sexy. That's how they're selling this shit to you. This is an adolescent mind. It's an adolescent reality. So it's like giving, like, the legalization of cannabis is basically when you understand the adolescent mind of mainstream society. It's like legalizing cannabis for high schoolers. What kind of effect is that going to have on, high schoolers? They're not even grown yet. They're not even like adults. They're still just growing. They're still in their growth process. The same thing is happening with adults. We only think we're grown because we have a job, we have kids, and we have that shit don't matter for your soul. You have kids raising babies right now. Everybody's being raised by the generation that predates our current generation. And you have to look at the mind control of timelines that go back in time and realize over time that shit doesn't change very much. Not a lot has changed since the 60s if you're coming from a higher mind and soul perspective. I mean, look at, racism. Civil Rights Act didn't do shit for racism. It was a way to get high, to think that things were changing. It didn't do anything. You got high for a moment, the high came down, and then they installed crack. Look at all the shit that happened in 69. They were literally getting people high. So in 69, it was people that were revolting. You had the Black Panthers out there. You had Martin Luther King and Malcolm X had just went on their tirade. They were out there. All these people coming together, and the government was the focus of attention. Kind of like George W. Bush when he did this punk-ass war on terrorism. The government was the focus of attention. What they get you high on after George Bush, your first black president. What they get you high on after the Black Panthers were coming and focusing that attention on the government. They went to the moon, supposedly, in 69. Not only that, they installed LSD into the community and got you high there. They amplified television at that time frame from 69. They put all these actors and actresses. Movies started to get big. Music Woodstock happened in 69. So 69 you had Woodstock. 69 you had the supposed moon landing. 69 you had people protesting and revolting against the government for Vietnam. You had the Black Panthers that were still rolling hard. And you had the American Indian movement. So you had the American Indian movement, the Black Panthers, the so-called hippie movement. You had these mind-expanding drugs with psilocybin, mushrooms, LSD. Then they just pumped it up even more. Cannabis. You had Woodstock. Their versions of pumping it up even more so they can manipulate that movement was, putting bad drugs out there, including the bad drugs of mind control with the television, the music, and stuff like that. But the literal bad drugs with like LSD and the drug of thinking that you went to the damn moon and the whole space race and the Cold War and all that other shit that's going on. So think of all these potent time frames and what happens in the long run. They don't care about like literally what's happening now, because as long as they are in power, as long as they are in control, they still got you. You're still a slave. And there's nothing you can do about it. This is why I'm saying it's so important to utilize the opportunity like Flat Earth to expand the program even further, to realize what's going on here. How is this affecting us? How is this being delivered? Why is this affecting us? And why is this being delivered like this? That's what breaks the codes. So if we just keep consuming ourselves with this, we just need to fairy dust our lives away into the future, then you're just using drugs or medications and stuff like that. It's not really going to do anything for the cancer itself. It's basically just like chemotherapy. It will kill the rest of your body. You will poison the rest of your body in hopes that it also kills the cancer. This is what's happening when you're doing any kind of drugs, in hopes that you will address the core issue of why people drink so much or why people smoke so much. Is because the experiencer has not dealt with whatever it is that cancer is. They've only covered it up. So, let's see. All that to be in reference to the title, the expansion of this video, all that is to say, or to make more of an observation point of the importance of dreams, because it's not just dreams. It's the ability to access your imagination, the ability to innovate from like a natural perspective, the ability to question this reality from a natural perspective, to not be subjected to what the system tells you your limitations are, because they can control you in time. They know it knows that you exist outside of time. So if they confine your consciousness to time, then they can confine you to enslavement within that time. So a good example of this is time flies when you're having fun, and time goes really slow when you're bogged down by something that you don't want to be doing. Like, that's an actual alchemy of this experience. Like, people know what that is, but we just kind of brush it to the side as like a thing that happens. It's like, no, when you're having fun, when you're doing something that you love, you're in those high vibrations. Those high vibrations literally send a shockwave through time. What do you think is happening when we are being bogged down in the universal clock? So the universal clock, the soul clock of our experience, is bogged down by the density of heliocentrism, is bogged down by the density of the military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial complex, this idea of progressive Western civilization with democracy, so-called democracy and capitalism and all this other bullshit that's presented to us as the only thing. It's affecting your time. Yeah, you might think things are changing for the better in the moment because Bernie Sanders is out there and there's never been a politician like him. Even if he were to be elected, like all this shit. You're still playing in the world of their version of limitation. So they've just utilized the algorithms or the equations of the basic interpretations of this reality to work against you. So if they steal your time, if they steal your emotional body, if they illegalize or criminalize your natural medicines and they install unnatural medicines or destructive versions of medicine, if they densify your body, if they separate you from your dreams, if they make you think you're a superhero because of the actions that happen within their superhero movie, if they separate you from your history, destroy your history and install a new history, if they separate you from your present moment by having you bogged down by all of these things that I just mentioned, if they separate you from your future, this is all by installing like your version of the future with Star Trek, Star Wars, all this mind control through the movies. It's all to manipulate your consciousness as a whole and the relationship that you have with time. Your time is crucial. In any moment, your time could be up. And it's not because of any one thing. It's an accumulation of everything. And you have the ability to utilize this time for, in a way that is, resonant with like McDonald's, or you can utilize it in a way that resonates from a perspective of, like compassion, beauty, love, observing the experience itself, doing something within the experience itself. Or you can just drive through. That's the basic. You can go to the drive through at McDonald's every day. You'll live. You'll be a lot heavier. You'll be full of a lot of sugar and it'll be a lot more difficult in a sense, but looking at themselves, an individual who looks at themselves can actually be more difficult than people who live their lives going through the McDonald's drive-thru, which is why that's there. That's the alchemy of that world. So it's very difficult for people to, as long as you are locked into the difficulty of the illusions, then you won't do anything to expand your consciousness and affect the time of the illusionists. This is why the heliocentric universe exists. This is why all of these destructive mentalities exist and are expanded upon. And these drugs or these mind control programs, because that's a drug, are amplified into your reality. Hollywood is a drug. Materialism is a drug. Fame, it's a drug. Social media is a drug. Prescription drugs are drugs. Like all this shit in response to the system, it's a drug. We might not see it like that, but over time you can catalog it easily as a drug. So that's pretty much what I wanted to expand upon in this video, because I spent more time explaining the dream world itself, and I kind of hinted on the things that affect the dream world. But I really wanted to kind of rehash a video that I did, or a few videos that I did back in the day, where I was talking about like how this dream world, the physical reality as a perspective of a dream world, is literally adjusted and manipulated just like the dream world is. And instead of being faced with like a demon or something, a nightmare, you're just faced with a low budget version of that in the waking space. So like I said, to run away from that, you'll just wake up because you're shocked. But in the waking state, time goes a little slower, so they can't really shock you. If they shock you, they will reveal themselves. So that 99% of love and light that I was explaining to you, that's actually having the intention of evil. If for everything that they do that's shocking or that doesn't adjust to the reality based upon your consciousness, they will reveal themselves, which is why it has to go based upon, it has to make its moves, it has to project its alchemy based upon the consciousness of the people. So it has to dumb you down at certain time frames. It has to install certain mechanisms at certain time frames. And as long as you are locked into that and not questioning it, then that is the intention of the alchemy, and that's where they got you. And over time, it can just, it has an effect on you, the individual, as the generation. So you being a manifestation of all of your previous generations, you have, in a sense, a responsibility to those generations, but you wouldn't know that if you don't have that connection to your family and that non-physical reality. You wouldn't do anything about that if you don't know your history. So you're just a floating piece of stardust, like they've told you, which separates you from your soul, your mind, and your body, your past, your present, and your future. So what happens is, since you're so locked into the materialistic version of reality, you don't realize your potential, your existence as every generation that you are a reflection of. Not only in a linear perspective of like, oh, my grandfather, my grandmother, and so on and so forth like that. Energetically, your soul generations, your experiences that have added up to this moment, to where you have something that you have to learn here. There's something that you have to do here. If you get consumed by the reality, the world itself, you will separate yourself, in a sense, from what your responsibilities are within the dream, within the physical reality, because you've fallen into the trap of the experience itself. And that's a way that this system can own you. Just like a demon in a dream can own you. And you'll just keep running away and waking up in horizontal land because you haven't challenged yourself to jump, to fly, to look inward, to lighten yourself up, to be able to face this reality from the inside out, as opposed to being reactionary or responsive from the outside in. It's a whole process that's going on here, and it really does boil down to your time. So when you have a fear of death, like I said, in reference to an abuse, a person who has been subjected to abuse, they create mechanisms, or they rationalize their reality to deal with that. So a lot gets missed. A lot of doors get closed when that happens. So if you have a fear of death, like I said in the last video, you're literally, that fear of death is affecting your life. It's affecting the way you live. And we can't see it because just like an abusive or somebody who's been subjected to the Stockholm syndrome who starts to love their enslaver, they love their enslavement. They can't see themselves or see what they've been missing out on or see what they have done because they've literally closed the door to the light that sheds light on what they've rationalized out of their reality. So a lot of these ways that we, deal with that rationalization are by installing the gap fillers like mainstream religions, food, sex, drugs, social media, fame, fortune, television, politics, all of this stuff that's a part of this Western civilization that ultimately has no concern with humanity. It exists at the expense of humanity. It exists at the expense of nature. So when you see that, then you can see that the system itself exists at the expense of your consciousness, shocked wave through your soul, your mind, and your body. So when people ask, why would they lie about the universe? This is why. Because they're not lying about the universe. They're lying for the intention of separating you from your relationship to the universe. The universe that is largely non-physical, that only appears to be physical based upon what we've been told by the illusionists. So they've just taken that illusion and doubled down constantly, generation upon generation, by drugging you up, keeping you locked into the emotional body, keeping you fearful, and simultaneously growing the illusion at the same time, the doggy treat. So this is why technology has a growth pattern. This is why the industrial age had this growth pattern. Intellect, information has a growth pattern, because as long as they affect that growth pattern, they affect your focus, your consciousness, and in affecting your consciousness and your focus, they affect their ability to control time through your belief systems. And as long as you are locked in to their version of the universe through your belief systems, that will affect, like I said earlier, your ability to either be subjected to time, subjected to the experience, or utilize your soul expression to the maximum potential within this time, within this experience. That's the actual definition of the polar shift. It's a different version of reality. It's not subjected to the world as it's presented to us. It's based upon you as the experiencer and the vibration of your consciousness. Every day you have the potential to grow, to learn, to do something. That's not what the norm is in society, though. The norm is to, get your money, get that food on the table, work on your 401k, and just deal with life. See how that affects your soul, your consciousness? People don't even, that's the thing. People who are locked into that reality and priding themselves in that materialistic version of reality, they have to be told that they don't have a soul. They have to be told that they are not a soul. They are only the body. That's the infrastructure of why you are told that you are only the materialistic version of yourself by people like Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson. And the fight between mainstream religions and scientism on television is to make you think that things are changing, to choose a side. You're not going to choose mainstream religion and the whole belief in that version of God inherently, because innovation and the most evolved people are all on the side of so-called science, or the religion of scientism. So through that version of the Hegelian dialectic, you're forced to choose the emptiness universe. You're forced to choose the heliocentric deadlands. And when you're forced to choose that, you might think you're not choosing it consciously, because you say, oh, I just don't care. I don't think about that stuff. I just, do my job. I just, hang out. I'm a good person. That's all that matters. As long as I'm a good person. What the hell does that mean? Just because you don't abuse people, you don't do that, you don't do this, like you make people laugh, that makes you a good person? From the perspective of your soul, your higher mind, does that make you a good person? If that's the case, what if you spend your entire life focusing on that? Not to say that there's anything wrong with this, I'm just using this as an example. Focusing on being a good person based upon the societal norms of what a good person is, like on a character on television, and you never do anything for going into the version, your soul. This is why like Smokey Robinson did the Tears of a Clown song. And like a lot of these comedians are like the most depressed people ever. It's because a lot of that work doesn't get done. A lot of the inner work doesn't get done. They focus so much of their world externalizing themselves and working on that a lot of the inner work gets sacrificed. And yeah, so that's, multiply that times the collective, then you can see like how things are not really being addressed. They're just being covered up. So you can see this with like dreams. Dreams affect you from the inside out. So you have no way of covering up if you're facing your dreams. You have no way of running from yourself if you dream every day consciously. Like you bring it back and you're consciously engaging. You're writing them down because you're listening to yourself. You're listening to yourself and you're speaking to yourself. And another thing that I think is happening is that you're listening to your ancestors too, coming through that signal. Just like you can listen to your ancestors through an ayahuasca ceremony or psychedelics or like mushrooms or stuff like that, or even when you're getting high. You're listening to a higher version of yourself. When you're getting high with other people, you're listening to a higher version of other people. But if it's just turned into a recreation, then you're missing out. Largely. You just turned it into a funnier version of the drive-through of McDonald's. And that's the intent of this heliocentric system. So if you see this place from the perspective of a dream, not to say that this is a dream. I mean, you can argue it poetically and stuff like that, but just to see it from the laws of the worlds of the dream world, then you can see like how it's another way of seeing how we've been controlled, why we've been controlled, why time is so important, why your consciousness, your focus is so important. Time in a day. You sleep 8 hours a day on average. The rest of the day is spent doing what? Playing video games, going to work, drinking, smoking. Before you know it, your day's done. You basically, if you see it from the prescription drug perspective, the 9 to 5 is like a forced upon you prescription drug. If you don't take that prescription drug, you won't get the healing benefits, supposedly. I mean, and this is just like a story. You won't get the healing benefits of money to get food on the table. So it's a government-sponsored prescription drug. 9 to 5, gone, dead. Gaming. People can see this when I mention this stuff, it's not to say that there's something wrong with this inherently. What I'm saying is that to the extremes, when you see it, there's very definitely something wrong. These kids and even these man children and woman children, because I think actually there's more women who play video games than men. If I haven't confirmed, there's no way that I can confirm that, but I read something somewhere that there's more women that play video games than men. In some kind of age group, I don't know what it is. Anyway, you can see gaming. They fill their entire lives up. Wake up. I mean, I used to do this as a kid when I had regular Nintendo and even Super Nintendo. But even at that time, we would go outside and play. Like Nintendo and Super Nintendo was just inside. Sometimes. And you get tired of it because you really just wanted to go outside and play. But, nowadays, people are jumping between playing video games, throughout the entire day, filling up the gaps between that entire day with eating, working, and social media. Literally, the entire dream of their waking reality has been given away to the illusions that have been cast down by the illusionists. That is the mainstream norm. If you don't think that there's some side effects that are going to affect you in time, from your soul perspective, from your higher mind perspective, from the potential with the basic meaning and purpose of your physical body reality, your physical reality. If you don't think there's going to be side effects from that, then you're severely naive. It might not seem it now in the moment because you're having fun, you're playing video games. Multiply that times living for 200 years. That's a good way to see this stuff. Like, we don't see it because, oh, yeah, I'm going to die when I'm 70, 80, 90, whatever it is. So, I'm just having fun while I can. In order to see the downfalls of a lot of this stuff, multiply this stuff the day, like a good day for whatever you would consider a good day. That's filled with gaming, social media, good food, or whatever it is. And then your idea of good food. And then like multiply that day times 300 years. From your soul perspective, is that healthy? From your higher mind perspective, is that healthy? And then people, for defense mechanism, they get into rational, oh, I don't do this every day, and so on and so forth. And games are actually teaching me this and that. People have to defend that. Just like politics, just like the heliocentric model, they have to defend it. I'm not saying that. I'm just using these examples as a way to see from a different perspective and to start to look from the inside out on the potentials of how this stuff could be used against us. Why? Why are video games promoted so much? Why is fast food promoted so much? Why is the university system, heliocentrism, politics, why is that promoted so much? These are time stealers. These are consciousness mind control programs that affect you in the long run. And like I said, this entity or these entities that could be seen as anchored in evil that want to expand those mind control programs so they can fill your gaps with themselves. That's just another version of, the rich getting richer while the poor get poorer. They're getting richer at the expense of your lack of richness. So you're going to have conscious beings who know that and don't give a shit and will continue that process to expand that process into future generations so their children and grandchildren, their generations, their timeline can benefit from that. Multiply that towards times non-physical entities that don't even exist inside time. They're not limited to time. And then you'll realize how important time really is. How important your time in this reality is. Because they know. They know how important your time is. They know if everybody were to get together and just start thinking about shit, you're literally affecting the non-physical reality. There's tests that have been done where you see, what is that? The numbers that shift, or when there was a test that was done where all these kids came together in one place and started meditating, and it affected like random number generators. Like, look into that stuff, the consciousness affecting random number generators, and just people coming together and thinking. You're affecting, like, kids can do this easily because they go into that space easily. They're not bogged down by the density. They're still dreamers. They're still very much connected to their meaning and purpose. It might not be easy to see based upon like their language, the language that they speak throughout their experience. But you know that they're tuned in. They can only express it now by, coloring with crayons or building blocks, because that's what's presented to us. But if you were to get like a kid who's dreaming and in connection with their dreams to really start to think on a spiritual level from an early age, multiply that times an entire collective of people, and then see how connected we would be to nature, each other, relationships, and so on and so forth. The system doesn't want you to do that, because you'll affect time. You'll affect their power grid. And that's just another example of like why heliocentrism exists. Because over time, they can steal your time. They go to war, they've stolen however many years from a vibratory perspective through your consciousness. A better example would be, being locked into the prison of Donald Trump for 4 years, being locked into the prison of George Bush, Barack Obama for 8 years. You're hopeless. You're empty. There's nothing you can do. People have written off the next 4 years or the next 3 years now because Donald Trump is there. They don't care anymore about anything. They're just like, whatever, as long as that piece of shit is out there. That is affecting your consciousness. So anyway, I think I've given enough examples of how the reality affects, how our perception, our time affects the experience itself, and why things are the way they are through the mainstream mechanisms that affect us. It's not to do a certain thing. It's never for a one linear thing. It's always multifaceted. It's always going to be affecting you. Any moves that they are making, the whatever it is that needs to remain in control and power over you, is affecting you in no less than 3 ways. It's affecting you with the intention of manipulating your soul, your mind, and your body. Your past, your present, and your future. Any move that's made by the mainstream reality is to affect all of those. And one move at this time is only setting the foundation up for another move at that time. No different than 9/11 happening to set up the move of the so-called war on terrorism, taking out Saddam, taking out Gaddafi, taking out Syria, and all these other places. No different than the Gulf of Tonkin setting up the move on Vietnam and Korea, and the Lusitania with the world wars. Like, all of this is a profit, not only financially. The biggest profit that they can make off of you is the profit of stealing your time. They're not trying to get rich with money. They don't care about that. It's the time that they're buying. Money is just a mechanism to buy and steal your time. Authority is the mechanism that makes you send your children to the public education system in order to steal their time, so that in that stealing of that time, they can indoctrinate them into deeper layers of control that will steal their time in the future. So they are stolen as children to the indoctrination program of the public education system, to steal their time only to have them conform to the society as it's presented to us in our so-called adult life. So you no longer need the authority figure of a teacher or a principal or a counselor in a high school, because you have now given the authority to your manager, your vice president, your whoever's in charge of you. And it's always going to boil down to time itself. It's the time that matters. And by going into your dreams to close it all out and loop it back to the dreams, this is why it's so important to reconnect with your dreams, because in that space, you have a different relationship with time. And by having that different relationship with time, it really does affect your conscious relationship with time. This is why you can have an 8-hour dream in 10 minutes. Events that have happened, because that's you. That's you having that experience. That's you. But if you have just limited yourself to, the drive-through at McDonald's reality or version of time, then you're going to be missing out. So look at that time that happens in your dream. You actually had 8 hours of experience in 10 minutes. You have literally learned. Look how much you can learn in 8 hours with a teacher that's very good. That's a teacher that you like, or an experience that you like somewhere, or being in nature for 8 hours, how that affects you. So think about that, and then think about the opposite of that. Like, you got good teachers, you got shitty teachers. Shitty teachers are there to steal your time. Good teachers are there to help you expand yourself with the time that you have. Your dream is a teacher. Your dreams are teachers. Your experience in every moment is a teacher. If you're locked in the emotional body, you're not going to be able to learn from those experiences. You're going to limit yourself. And that's why this system is designed the way it is. And they have to go into the depths of reconstructing the very universe that you think you're existing in and as, in order to make you believe in that system, in order to engage your consciousness. If you don't believe in something, you're not going to be completely engaged in that illusion. That's why they have to lie to you about the universe itself, because it makes you completely believe in all the other illusions that come after that, even though you don't have to consciously believe or know the constructs and all the math of gravity and all that other stuff. Subconsciously, because everybody else around you believes in that reality, subconsciously they got you. And that's more of who and what you are, energetically speaking, than your conscious reality, because you fight yourself in the conscious reality by trying to be something that you're not. So it kind of takes away from your maximum potential. But if you're subconscious, this is why cartoons, movies, all this stuff, it's programmed to affect you, the child mind, a certain way. Just like I said, the school system is setting the tone for when you are an adult, and then you just take that into the rest of your life. So yeah, time, dreams, consciousness, illusions, control. It's basically the theme that I wanted to share in this video. And thanks to people who are left some stuff in the comment section, and somebody else sent me an email too. I just want to let you know that, right? Thank you for that. I think that's pretty much it. I know there's always, I can go in on dreams for and give examples of dreams for a long time, but I like analyzing the realm itself and how it relates to the conscious reality, because it is really important to see these things. It's another version of being able to understand how and why things are existing, not just what's happening. Like, what happened in that dream? What dream did you have? Was it a bad dream? Like, these are all what's. But when you start going into the how and the why, you start questioning and analyzing the reality itself, the experience itself. That's a different world, has a different effect on you. And it really does affect your relationship with time. So I'll leave it there. Thank you for joining me. Again, thank you to everybody for the support. And until next time, from all my relations, peace, love, and harmony.